The night began with a strange stillness. The air hung heavy over the Gulf, too calm, too quiet, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. In New Orleans, the streets were dimly lit by flickering lamps reflecting on the water that already lapped against the curbs. Some prayed, some packed, others laughed nervously in bars, trying to forget the fear creeping through every window pane. Out in the Gulf of Mexico, a swirling mass of clouds began to take shape, a monstrous eye opening in the dark. The winds gathered strength, whispering across the ocean like a warning no one wanted to hear. By dawn, the whispers had turned into a scream, and as the storm approached the coast, its hunger grew. People looked up at the sky, unaware that this night would carve its name into history, not just as a storm, but as a test of humanity itself. But no one could imagine what came next, when Earth trembled. If stories like this fascinate you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It keeps history alive. Before the wind turned savage, New Orleans was alive with rhythm. Jazz spilled from the corners of Bourbon Street, laughter echoed between old brick walls, and the scent of gumbo drifted through humid air. The city was a tapestry of cultures: Creole, Cajun, African, French, woven together over centuries of resilience and soul. Life moved slowly here, like the lazy roll of the Mississippi River that curved protectively around its edges, but the city's charm hid its fragility. Much of New Orleans sat below sea level, shielded only by a system of levees built to hold back the waters of Lake Pontchartrain and the Gulf beyond. For decades, experts had warned that one great storm could turn the Big Easy into a bowl, and the levees would not hold. Few listened. In late August 2005, meteorologists began to trace a tropical depression forming near the Bahamas. It was just another storm, they thought. Until it wasn't. The system gathered strength as it swept across Florida and into the Gulf, its eye sharpening, its winds intensifying. By August 27th, the name Katrina was spoken with unease. Satellite images showed a swirling monster, vast, violent, and heading straight for the city that danced below sea level. The music played on, but the horizon was already turning black. In the early hours of August 29, 2005, the world outside New Orleans changed shape. The sky, once blue and wide, now churned with furious gray. Rain fell sideways, driven by winds that screamed through the streets at more than 125 miles per hour. The air was alive with debris, shingles, branches, entire signs ripped from their posts and flung like paper into the storm. Katrina had arrived. Across the Gulf Coast, from Louisiana to Mississippi, the hurricane roared ashore like an ancient beast awakening from the deep. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath walls of water. Boats were hurled onto highways. Cars floated like toys down streets that had become rivers. Inside the city, power failed before dawn. Darkness swallowed homes and hospitals alike. People clung to their roofs, waving flashlights and shirts at helicopters that could not yet come. The levees, those fragile barriers between the living and the flood, groaned under the rising surge. And then, one by one, they broke. When the first levee gave way, the city gasped. Water poured in with unstoppable force, filling the lower wards like a bursting dam. Within hours, 80% of New Orleans was underwater. Entire districts vanished beneath brown, swirling waves. The Ninth Ward, one of the poorest and proudest neighborhoods, was drowned. People sought refuge wherever they could. Thousands crowded into the Louisiana Superdome, their only sanctuary a vast concrete shell meant for celebration, not survival. Inside, the air grew thick and hot. The roof peeled away in patches as the storm screamed overhead. Outside, the National Guard waded through flooded streets, hearing only distant cries and the moan of the wind. For 3 endless days, the storm and its aftermath blurred together. Helicopters buzzed overhead, plucking survivors from rooftops. Dogs barked in the distance, then fell silent. Families were torn apart, some rescued, some never seen again. The storm did not discriminate. It took the rich and the poor, the young and the old. But it was the most vulnerable, those who had the least, who suffered the most. By the time Katrina passed, silence fell again, but not peace. Only the sound of dripping water and distant sirens filled the drowned city. The mighty Mississippi had found its way home, reclaiming what humans had borrowed. The hurricane had come and gone in days, but the scars it left behind would last for generations. When the winds finally died, New Orleans was no longer the same city. The music had stopped. The laughter was gone. All that remained was a hollow silence, broken only by the distant sound of helicopters and the soft lap of polluted water against broken walls. Bodies floated through the streets where children once played. Cars lay stacked against buildings, tangled with debris and shattered lives. The city's heart, its people, wandered in shock, searching for loved ones, for food, for hope. The heat rose, and with it, the stench of decay. The Superdome, once a symbol of pride, had become a vision of despair. Tens of thousands of survivors waited for help that came too slowly. Supplies ran out. The air grew unbearable. People called out for water, for medicine, for someone to hear them. Outside, the levees still bled water into neighborhoods that no longer existed. The U.S. Coast Guard and local rescuers worked tirelessly, airlifting thousands to safety. Yet, every rescue carried the same haunting question. How could this happen here, in one of the richest nations on Earth? Days turned into weeks. The floodwaters receded, revealing streets coated in mud and memory. Churches became shelters, schools turned into morgues. Survivors scrawled messages on rooftops, "Help us, still here." New Orleans, the city that once danced to the rhythm of jazz, was now a ghost of itself. And as the sun rose over the drowned skyline, it shone not on triumph, but on the fragile endurance of those who had nothing left, yet refused to give up. They began to clean, to rebuild, to remember, because that's what humans do after the storm. They start again, even when the wind has taken everything. Hurricane Katrina was not just a natural disaster. It was a mirror held up to humanity. In its reflection, the world saw both the power of nature and the deep fractures within society. The storm exposed more than broken levees. It revealed broken systems, forgotten people, and the harsh reality of inequality. More than 1,800 lives were lost. Over 1 million were displaced. Entire communities vanished overnight. But what lingered longest wasn't only the flood. It was the question: how could the world's most powerful nation fail its own citizens so completely? In the weeks that followed, the world watched in disbelief. Government agencies stumbled, communications collapsed, and relief efforts moved painfully slow. Elderly residents died waiting for buses that never came. Families searched shelters for relatives with no records, no names, just hope. The failure became as infamous as the storm itself. Yet, amid the chaos, heroes emerged. Local residents, nicknamed the Cajun Navy, launched their own boats to rescue neighbors. Volunteers from across the country drove south with food, medicine, and open arms. Musicians held benefit concerts. The spirit of the city, its soul, refused to drown. In the years after, New Orleans rose again. The levee system was rebuilt, stronger and taller. Urban planners and engineers from around the world studied Katrina as a grim lesson, a warning that human complacency is often the deadliest factor in disaster. But something else changed too, a collective awareness. Katrina became a turning point in how governments prepared for climate events. It inspired new emergency systems, new conversations about climate change, poverty, and resilience. Still, scars remain, not just in the city's foundations, but in its people. The trauma lingers in those who lived through the night. The wind tore everything apart. Some never returned. Some still wait for justice, for acknowledgement, for closure. Katrina was not the last storm, and it will not be the worst. But it was a reminder that no wall, no levee, no city, and no nation is beyond the reach of nature's hand. Because when the sky decides to turn against us, all we can do is endure. In the quiet that followed, the waters receded, but the echoes remained. Hurricane Katrina was more than a storm. It was a question carved into history. What happens when the world's heartbeat falters and we are left to face the silence? New Orleans rose again, not because the winds showed mercy, but because its people refused to surrender. They played their music once more, soft at first, then louder, until the rhythm of life returned to the broken streets. From rooftops to church pews, from ruins to rebirth, the city's pulse began to beat again. Every hurricane leaves behind a memory, and every survivor carries a story. Katrina's story is one of pain, of resilience, and of the timeless truth that the human spirit can endure even when the wind tears the world apart. Because history remembers not only what was lost, but what refused to die. If you believe these stories should never be forgotten, subscribe and keep history alive. When Earth Trembled.